Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with James Cahill, the winemaker at Soter Vineyards. We're located here in the beautiful Willamette Valley. We're sitting up in the top of their beautiful biodynamic farm. James, welcome, and tell us about Soter Vineyards.
Well, welcome here. And pleasure to talk about what we do here at Soter Vineyards. The operative word there is, of course, Sodor. And you, as a savvy wine personality, would know that Tony Sodor was and is on the American wine scene, very famous winemaker, and, of course, a tremendous history in Napa with noteworthy his own project, Etude Winery, which he operated up through 2001 as sole proprietor and sold it at that point and purchased the ranch that we're visiting right now, the Mineral Springs Ranch. He and his wife, Michelle, founded Soter Vineyards in the late 90s at a vineyard called Beacon Hill. And I was hired to do the winemaking there for a very small family wine farm. And as you can see, it's grown a bit since then. In addition to Tony's great resume in Napa, which included a long stint at Spotswood, which he converted to organic farming back in the 80s. And his signature on the wines at Arajo, Villader, Dalaval, as you can imagine, a really blue chip resume. And then, of course, here, Soter Vineyards in Oregon has grown into 3 projects. With the way we think of it here, this biodynamic farm, the Mineral Springs Ranch, one specific label where we make Pinot Noir and sparkling wine, rather delicious, the equivalent of American grower champagne, right? We do all the process here in-house, have since the late 90s. North Valley Vineyards, which we would like to conjure up the image of the nested AVAs that are located in the northern part, clustered really in the northern part of the Willamette Valley. That would be from where we're sitting here in Carlton, in the Yamhill Carlton AVA, down to the Eola, Amity Hills, and McMinnville, some of the more prominent AVAs, along with Ribbon Ridge, Dundee Hills. We have commitments in all those nested AVAs. And the North Valley wines are sourced exclusively from those good zip codes, if you will, right? They're very distinctive and well-defined areas where we can mine for both diversity and distinction, right? We do a series of bottlings that reflect those distinctions, as a matter of fact. And a fairly new project that is, it's 10 years old now, called Planet Oregon. Very much a pet project of Tony and Michelle. We've been in the business of making some pretty fancy wines for most of our careers, Tony and I. And Planet Oregon is a fairly priced, we'll say, modest economics. Michelle requested we have something she didn't have to wait till Friday night to pull the cork on, right? And which is a bit of a challenge. Farming good grapes in this climate comes at a cost. Modest yields are requisite to achieving good ripeness consistently. And all sustainably farmed, right? Where the ranch where we're talking right now is a certified biodynamic farm. And there's many organic sites for North Valley. There are organic and certified sustainable sites for Planet Oregon, which in its price range is pretty uncommon. And we're very proud of that.
So obviously we're sitting in a beautiful property, and it's a fully functioning farm. How many acres is the property? How many acres are planted to grapes? And give us just a brief description of what else is here. I know we just drove around it and you pointed out a few things, but describe a little bit.
That's really fun to talk about. We would say there's 240, close to 250 acres that are the ranch, which is quite diverse. At the heart of it, perhaps 40 acres of producing vines at this point. Behind you could imagine vines on a hillside. That might be something that Tony's kids will plant in the future. He and Michelle enjoy their time here on the property, and of course they hope that will translate to the next generation as well, right? So 250 acres, 40 acres of vines, the farm, as you just had a quick look around, is still, it's not in full bloom yet. I'd like to think, right, that as much as there is to show you right now, I think with all things, our best work is still ahead. And so while there's a handful of cattle and a couple of happy pigs and chickens and goats and like that, I think that we'll be discovering and amplifying little aspects of the farm in the future. You have seen evidence of the produce we grow here, which is largely going to the staff, feeding our guests, a little bit to the local food bank. I think the future of that, how much that grows, we're still discovering as well. Is that a fair answer for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you have 40 acres here planted to Pinot Noir.
Yes.
Exclusive. And Chardonnay. And then you were talking about the other projects. What's your total case production? And of those 3 wines, where can people find them? Are they available nationally, locally, a combination?
Terrific question. Thank you for inviting that. And like all other things, kind of evolving. We could start with the estate where we bottled somewhere around 5,000-6,000 cases of wine, very vintage dependent. I could go on and on about some of the vagaries of that. Some of the clonal selections are very shy bearing, and in some years, let's just say the yields can vary pretty wildly. But estate Pinot Noir and sparkling wine, a method Champenoise Brut Rosé, one of the most visible, about 1,000 cases of that stuff annually, and often small amounts of Blanc de Blanc. The Chardonnay to date is going into the bubbly projects. The young vines may produce an estate Chardonnay in the future. So 5,000-6,000 cases from the estate of certified biodynamic grapes making world-class wines. We are fortunate to sell a lot of those right here at our doorstep, and we're also very proud to have them distributed in maybe 40 different markets around the country. The estate wines are pretty rare, right? Just do the math, right? And the other projects we would speak of specifically, the North Valley Vineyards might be less than 10,000 cases. A bottling called Classic that we're lucky to find in restaurants. It's a beautiful regional blend, right? I mentioned earlier the distinction of the sites, and as well the ability to blend in more challenging vintages can be a great option. There are reserve Pinot Noirs and Chardonnay in addition to the classic bottlings, and I think that's all I'll say about North Valley. And Planet Oregon is a 12 to 15,000 case Pinot Noir project. There is a little very small pilot program for some sparkling wine under the Planet Oregon label. That is not an elaborate method champenoise, but something we carbonate ourselves. Just delightful and useful along the lines of a little Prosecco or something, right?
And affordable.
And affordable, that's right. That's right. And
because we like affordable sparkling wine.
Well, that's kind of it. It's useful, right? And we would be pleased to offer you a little taste of that when we greet you. But dry, made from organic grapes, and to date less than 1,000 cases. But it's a project that we will again be kind of discovering as we go along.
Well, you've given us a great background on Soter Vineyards, and now we're going to get to know you a little bit. So, James, what is one of your first memories relevant to wine?
Yeah, so I'll just go right back to my childhood and sitting at a table just like this one with my family on a special occasion, a fancy neighbor coming over or something. We'd have a bottle of Chianti. My dad was a World War II veteran, and I'll tear up remembering this, but that was about the only wine beverage that was in our household, and I can still remember the really magical effects of a taste of good champagne going, wow, this is really different. And of course, kind of high school, early college experience, immediately I can still picture the little black cat on the necker of the Zeller Schwarzkopf, terrible Riesling-esque wine that we all have to endure. But I was very fortunate. I'd been working in restaurants from the time I was about 14 years old to kind of drift into the culture of wine as a server in various places, and started with those tastes. I'll go on and on,
That's
obviously.
great. So if you started so long ago working in restaurants, and you've obviously had a lot of wonderful wines over the years, so this is a loaded question, but is there one particular wine that stands out as a really memorable wine that, where were you? What was the wine? And I'm sure you have like dozens of those, but if you can tell us the story of one of those most memorable wine drinking experiences.
Yeah, there's one that's like the best date I was ever on or something like that. That would be 1981, Prince de Merode, Claude de Corton, Grand Cru out of Magnum at a restaurant called Montrachet in Manhattan. That was, it was a beautiful meal with friends, and probably one of the fanciest restaurants I'd ever been in at that time. And the moment and the food and perfect service and what would probably now be a fairly simple, if not modest wine, but it had a few years on it, and it really seduced me, to say the least.
Fantastic. So if we were to come to your home and go into your wine cellar, what would we be finding in there? What kind of wines and from where?
That's a hilarious question, because it's still that bottle of Chianti that was on my table.
In a basket?
Not in a basket anymore. But I'm a big fan of the work of some American importers. Brian Larkey at De La Terra would be one that comes to mind. Modest Chianti, a little Pinot Blanc from Legator. There was a Sagacio Barbera on the table last night, right? Northern Italian wine, as you can tell, is kind of the most common wine on our table at home.
Huh. Interesting. Have you had the opportunity to travel around the world? And is there a particular, well, you just said Italian wines, kind of Northern Italian, take your thing. But traveling around the world and living here in the U.S., in your opinion, what populations drink the best in terms of quality?
Yeah, I'm not really well prepared to talk about that. Since I've been here in Oregon, this is not a complaint, but I just have not traveled that much. I don't want to say I'm finished racing, but the boys my wife and I have raised are both in college or leaving for college right now, and have enjoyed. In the last few weeks, they have been in Austria, Portugal, Spain, and France. My wife and I have been in Yamhill County. You see where I'm going. But
there's something wrong with that picture.
It may change. But actually, oddly, it was traveling to France with a French wine importer, particularly Bobby Ketcher. Made several trips with Bobby back in the day. He was very generous in terms of helping educate people. And spent a lot of time in France in the early 90s, months and months, just fortunately wandering and tasting, more as a merchant, right, than as a production person. Mm-hmm. But Bobby, the only American wine he represented was Beaufrère, and he was good enough to set me up with a harvest job there. That is how I found my way to Oregon back in the mid-90s.
Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
It's Pinot Noir. I just can't hesitate. No, frankly, I would be more inclined to talk about the places where you grow wine rather than just the variety, right? Like comes to mind Alsace, where, who's the nice fellow at Marcel Dice? I think it's Jean-Michel Dice, talking about how I remember him in the 90s pointing out that Grand Crus were identified not by the varietal, but by the place, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, maybe a terroirist or whatever. That's such a clumsy word these days, but I think I would probably be looking more to the places, and that would be cool climate regions.
Okay, let's see if you have as quick an answer to this one. What's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
I have a really easy answer there. My time at Beaufrère, I was lucky enough to rub elbows with Robert Parker, right? And he was and remains, a giant in wine criticism. And while these days it's easy to find folks talking about a Parker palette or this or that, I begin the story with his brilliant work at the Advocate that really opened up the world to a lot of Americans, right? And it wasn't the scoring of the 82 Bordeaux that made him famous that I remember. It was the value issues, right? That identified wines from French country wines and little Italian wines that people would have been timid about trying unless they were well-traveled. But when it had an A rating or even a B plus, and it was $7 or $10 a bottle with the blessing of the Advocate, wow. So, now the whole score thing has become pretty dark, frankly, right? I think it still steers retail habits in an undue manner. The dominant critical voices are changing a little bit, but it's so unfair to assign a score to a thing like wine as a commodity. Eric Asimov made a great comment about this, like assigning a score to a wine is like taking a picture of the sky. I thought that was brilliant. And there's it's evolving too, right? Your presence here. Eric Asimov's voice is a great writer and not score-based things, even if they rank, S10 or something. That's kind of fun stuff. But I think criticism is changing. I think the scoring has, I think its day has probably passed, just as like my kids that I mentioned, their habits for their peer-to-peer communications have such value. And while there may be experts, of course, there's a lot of voices out there barking things now. And mostly, I will say that the scores, when we get a big score, and we've been lucky to now and again, the phone starts to ring. But oddly, it's not our customer always, right? It's someone that's chasing a score, not after our wines. And that the next year they're gone. And the people who know what we do are still here, but it's the same thing for merchants. The phone rings for a product, which is, you can tell the disdain.
But there's something about your loyal customer knows the story, and that's what's so important. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about you as a wine drinker. Really easy. Red, white, or rosé?
Yes. No, I love all those things. I couldn't possibly...
Orange. Oh, I'll add that. I'll add that next time. Still or sparkling?
Oh, again, just yes. We've. I can't tell you how much fun we've had exploring the traditional champagne methods, right? And heightened appreciation for good work in that channel. And I still see champagne as some of the best value in the world, which could surprise people because often the price of admission there is a little steep too, right? But in terms of pure value, there can be some really delicious wines there. And couldn't discriminate.
So here at Soter Vineyards, you have a very unique opportunity when guests come because the experience is a food and wine pairing. And you're working, as you were telling me, with vegetables, and you're working with products that are from the farm, and you're creating pairings. How do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you think there are rules to follow? Do you kind of throw it to the wind and drink whatever you want, or do you look for certain things?
Certainly could look for certain things. I would want to start first with, here at the ranch, you can still have a tasting without food and wine pairings. The provisions tasting is very much built on, again, creating a sense of this place and what this farm is, right? As we talked a little bit earlier and walked around the farm, we think of it as one piece. The food is, obviously we have a winery, and I like to think make world-class wines. You can have the wines without the food. It's kind of what I'm getting at. And the pairing of the two is beautifully entertaining and hedonistic, right? It's not like you're taking your medicine to have that food.
So what are you looking for when you're making dinner or out at a restaurant? How are you looking to pair?
I'm not above saying grows together, goes together, right? When it comes to regional cuisines. And I came out with my Italian wine fetish, right? And natural there. But I would think just without trying to create any angst or barriers or rigid rules, just looking at the kind of the weight or texture of things and choosing appropriately, right? I would like to think, some things work better than others. Certainly, if we were pouring wines for you right now in the context of a meal, we'd probably have put some thought into making sure there's not an obvious clash, right? But I think my, kind of my age and experience in American wine, in watching and kind of riding the wave of American wine. Obviously, it's founded in French and Italian traditions. It's the first thing we studied, right? And so I think it's quite natural to look at like the food of a region and want to explore what the people who have come before us have enjoyed, right?
So when it comes to exploring, some people have not had the pleasure of tasting your wines to date. For someone who hasn't tasted your wine, what do you think they're missing out on?
I'd like to think, a really distinctive regional expression, right? This is a really special place to grow wines. This is the generation that came before us. We're so fortunate that people had the courage. And, when you talk to some of the first families, they're such interesting people and in many cases not big self-promoters, right? Like I worked for the folks at Elk Cove and the current generation, Adam Campbell, a really bright young man who's obviously grown up in the business, but you wouldn't immediately recognized the fact that his parents were groundbreaking, first to plant on sedimentary soils. They were doing it as an agricultural project, right? Not necessarily just as a certainly not a vineyard ego project that you know what I'm talking about. People who just want a winery and can. The regional identity here, that is this cool climate, that I think our wines reflect that. And I would also go back to the notion of hedonism. As expert as Tony is in crafting beautiful wines for, I won't mention the number of years, but going back to the 80s with great success, there's still a built-in need to make things delicious, right? Like you shouldn't have to wonder if it's good, we're quick to say, right? So we would think, a regional identity, there's a voice to this place, right? To the Mineral Springs Ranch, or another vineyard in development with only about 5 acres producing in the Eola Amity Hills with an equally distinctive voice. Both of them represent their places on earth. This ranch we're a little more familiar with, having worked with it from the ground up for more than, since 2005 was the first significant bottling. A distinctive voice, delicious, and something that is authentic. And we believe there's great value in knowing that the grapes were grown with care. The kind of stewardship of the land has always been really essential to this project. You, again, mentioning the kids my wife and I have raised, and Tony and Michelle's kids, there's never been a moment where we wouldn't be happy to see our kids walking down a vine row eating the grapes that we're going to make wine out of, right? How can I give you a better demonstration of how we feel about the quality of fruit we're growing beyond deliciousness, that it's grown with integrity and care?
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
So if space aliens were to land on the property, which of the wines that you produce would you want to present them with?
Do you know something I don't? Is this,
You never know.
I think, how could you not greet a traveler and a stranger with anything but sparkling wine? You would just try this. This will light you right up, alien.
So, you said that you've been here, over 15 years or just about 15 years producing wine from this property. You've obviously seen multiple vintages. We were talking about weather. We had a unique thunderstorm for like 10 minutes when I first arrived in the middle of summer. But I'm curious, do you tend to see more variation from vintage to vintage, or do you see more similarities? What does this region or this property give you?
Well, this moment in time is unique for the good fortune of 5 really successful harvests. And in fact, going back to 13, that would be 6 back. It was a very good growing season until it wasn't, right? Here in these cool climates, you can make note that we just starting to color up, where in other areas in California, things are fully colored, where we start later and we finish later. That late finish with the days getting shorter, and while the grapes are in the process of sugar loading and flavor development, we'd like to think, I think the conventional wisdom has been, of course, that we're developing flavor as quickly, if not a little less quickly, than we might be accumulating sugar, right? Mm-hmm. So, but it does put us in a dangerous spot for being vulnerable to the onset of winter rains the later you go. There's a commonality in the recent trends, which have been an earlier start to the season. Old world wisdom was early season, short season. I don't know that we have seen that in a trilogy of early and generous growing seasons, 14, 15, 16, each of them distinctive. 14, opulent, fruit-forward. 15, with a little more time. The wine's a bit more complete, obvious structure, intensity. 16, beautiful balance, richness, just hard not to like, frankly, and each of them distinctive, but still carrying the regional identity and still showing the sunshine of those vintages. 17, more classic, still forward. I'm kind of rambling on you a bit here, but there's really two answers. It's easy to look at the recent trend and lump it together as everything from paying attention to climate change I don't want to dance around that. I'm not one to say that we're going to be planting something besides Pinot or having to change course anytime soon. I don't think we're seeing that. We're certainly embracing what nature is giving us and have had really great success. The 18s in the cellar might be the best wines we've ever made, for example. Historically, the difference, where Tony at the table, especially with our wealth of experience in California, the big difference coming up here in the 90s was the extreme vintage variation, right? That from one year to the next, there would be wild variation in what the growing season would offer, how the growing season would end, right? Which is often a qualitative a rainy harvest can really take the fun out of our opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. And this isn't a little rain, right? We'll take that any day. We'll take that before we take a heat spike, frankly, right? And yes, I am looking to the south as I say that, right? We would rather deal with a little intermittent rain, but really the winter rains that I'm talking about, significant rains, can be challenging, and that can make a really huge difference from one year to the next. And historically, that's been or I used to say kind of Oregon wine lovers and Oregon winemakers need to embrace vintage variation, right?
Are there any signs or predictors that will help you determine what the outcome of a harvest will be?
Interesting. I'm giggling as we're looking at nice ripe tomatoes. At this time of year, as tomatoes ripen, we giggle thinking that if it's a good tomato year, maybe it'll be a good grape year too. But no, I think it is really the growing season may script a lot about the quantity of the crop, certainly how well and how diligent we've been for keeping things clean. Like every region, we have our challenges. Here it's not bugs or things that would be obvious, but mildew pressure, for example, right? Maladies. If we've, with good rigor and care, a healthy crop, I just wrote a note to our staff saying that as weird as our summer weather has been, it's actually been a great growing season. Started relatively early, ample crop, moderate temperatures, a heat spike right when we would have asked for it. In other words, helping the vines to change their growth habits, getting their attention with a little stress maybe, I don't know. But then we're really at the mercy of nature come harvest, and I imagine every region has their challenges, but here, just because it's what I've lived with for most of the last 25 years, I think every harvest I would go back to the weather, right? And what we were looking at in terms of the kind of gun to our head, if we're going to pick or we're going to get really wet, or, a late season where you've just got your fingers crossed that the weather holds to get time on the vine, right? Not heat, not sunshine, but just time for things to develop. So I hope that was an answer.
Yes, absolutely. Mother Nature always throws you a curveball, so you cannot have a common predictor.
Or an opportunity.
It's glass is half full.
That's right.
I know when we were touring around, you're a working farm and you're able to have a crew that's here year round now. Mm-hmm. Do you and your team have any good luck rituals that you do at the start of harvest or throughout harvest or at any point?
That's a really fun question to think about. I don't know. I think once we get things in the barn, as we say, right, as we're well into harvest and have some full tanks, and we are the folks who, we don't really have a recipe, right? So we're often in the winery all night long with staff. And it's usually those nights that we'll find Tony assisting. And that might be either doing a punch down or offering directives, but it would end with smoking a cigar. And I think I've just outed him.
So, walking through this property and touring around with it, do you ever talk to the vines? Or obviously you're not managing the vines on a day-to-day basis, but you're in them. Once the wine gets into the barrel, do you talk to it?
No.
You're a biodynamic producer, so.
Yeah, that could be a whole conversation right there, I suppose. No, there's the notion of what would you be listening to, more than talking. Would we be listening to Glenn Gould playing the Goldberg variations or Nirvana, right?
Okay. Well, we're actually gonna revisit music in a little bit, so hold on there. I'm curious, when you were little, I know you got into the restaurant industry at 14 and wine picked up. Did you have any other aspirations as a little boy of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Little boy, I wanted to fly jets. And by high school, that had drifted into a real affection for music, which I did well into starting college as if I wouldn't do anything else.
And what do you do in your free time?
Well, I have coached Little League. It seems my lovely wife is always finding some kind of renovation project for me, and I'm not really good at banging nails or anything, but she'll find something for me to do. It's usually things to do with the house or the family. Obviously in this area, it's just natural to go take a hike. I've actually been surprised looking at my kids who've been involved in various activities that now that they've drifted away from Oregon, they value their time outdoors and like that. And yes, one of them fishes and hunts with his friends, things like that. But that wasn't necessarily the culture of our house. But I think it's, just generally this beautiful place we live in invites you to kind of get outside.
So you mentioned that you're about to be an empty nester. Time to plan some more romantic dinners. Hopefully you've had them over the years anyway. What wines would you be opening up for that romantic evening?
Yeah, there's a bottle of champagne in the fridge. When my wife drops the kid in Boston in a couple of weeks, maybe we'll get to that. No, we have always enjoyed champagne, and actually Tony put a couple of nice bottles in her hands just the other day, and it would probably be for the two of us to share and for an evening. And I'm not the type to say begin with champagne, right? Like it could be the whole evening, but that and a special occasion, usually we just allow a little more budget and with that a few more choices. And again, I would go back to loving Northern Italian wines and their tremendous values, right? Just in terms of the quality that you can get for a modest tariff. And as you can imagine, I have a great affection for Burgundy. Oh, and white wines from the Loire. And around here, I love to share wines blind with people. It's so disarming, right? So whether it's Sauvignon or a classic Sancerre was one I pulled on Tony the other day. God, this family, Jackie Blow in around Vouvray, making beautiful Loire whites. Yeah, right?
Thirsty.
Exactly.
So looking back at the work you've done, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Yeah, so my role here has shifted over the years, right? I was the only employee for a long while, and very proud of the very first vintage here, 02, but that's always been a collaboration with Tony, right? And I don't shy away from that a bit. I'm very proud of that collaboration, and ego-wise, I've never really had an urge to see my name on a label. I remind the other young winemakers here, some of them have been here 10 years, that only one of us has his name on the label, right? So there's been really proud of the collaborative nature of how things have worked, and certainly for myself, shepherding in the 02 Beacon Hill, the 08, the 08s from this property, the evolution of the sparkling wine program. And, one of the things that never comes up when we're in these kind of winemaker things is how important grape growing is. And I heard it coming out of a young winemaker in an interview earlier this week. I heard it coming from him of just how important, not just the place, but the level of rigor that we put into farming grapes. People talked about sorting tables as having changed the Oregon industry from the 90s to echoing in the 2000s. And I find that really but golly, the level of work in the vineyard and our successes with crafting a really fine crop every year, and the people involved with that and those interactions. I'm so lucky to have worked with legendary viticulturists here, and today with people right on the cutting edge of Oregon viticulture. Lee Bartholomew, working for the Results Partners, the busiest vineyard management company. Sterling Fox, Joel Myers, Ken Kupperman, who works for the Jackson family wine right now. Tony Fernandez over at Winemakers LLC, who does a lot of work for our Planet Oregon Wines. And I miss Ken Johnson, a dear friend. You could see I could go on and on. But these are people who are actively working to up the game right now. And often it seems like behind the scenes when frankly, it really is the scene, Mm-hmm. Not to discredit the work of really thoughtful winemakers, young and old. Oddly enough, both things right here at Sodor, right? Tony and I, as of a certain age, and of course, Chris Flatwood and the folks on the way up on the other end of the project.
So lots of collaboration, which is a great achievement. Is there a piece of advice that you've carried through with you, or one that stood out? And if you could share that piece of advice, and who might have given it to you at some point in your life?
This would be about wine.
Wine or life?
Yeah, I think I mentioned Bob Parker earlier. I remember him saying, "Do what you love, and the money will come," and that was certainly true for his brother-in-law, Mike Etzel, who that would be another voice where I would say, "Golly, I learned so much from him." And it was largely about sometimes doing nothing when it comes to winemaking, right? But there's a guy whose heart and soul is in the vineyard, right? Right back, circling right back to the things that are still fundamental. Those wines were grown from the ground up, and meeting Tony, it was a continuation of the same process, but with an immense skill set, right? Like there's very little, I think, in American wine that Tony hadn't seen by the time I met him, including developing the sparkling wine thing, which was only a couple years in process. That's more than 20 years ago now, right? But yeah.
Complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
disappointment. No, I really see it as just part of the table. It would be incomplete.
Incomplete and disappointing.
I think I'll go with the incomplete. So.
If there was one person in this world, living or deceased, famous or not famous, that you would love to see with a bottle of your wine in their hand, who might it be?
Wow. That's a really fun question. My head is spinning. everything from, one of my teachers from my youth to my mom, who, before she passed, had a taste or two, you can be sure. But, I don't think I'd be looking to, there are folks who just the idea of them, I admire Andrei Chalachev and people, legends and like that, right? But I think I'd probably take it to a much more personal thing, like just a childhood mentor, someone who, and I would just say, taste this delicious thing, right?
And look what I did. Yeah. So what are the three wines, or what are three wines you would take with you to a deserted island?
Okay, yeah, so you got me. Champagne would be necessary. From there, it gets a little tougher. If price was not an object,
Price and weather conditions are not an option.
Yeah, so I think I'd probably go champagne. I'd probably be looking for that Loire white and a bottle of Burgundy, and that would be, it's just in us, those who love the wines in the region. You have to look to your producers, so it would be Meunier, Dujac, no surprises, right?
Okay. So now taking these wines, this is where we play our little music game. So now all your knowledge about music can come back. I want you to pair wines with music. Some of the wines we've spoken about today. So what you'd want to listen to, or what you do listen to when you're sipping it, or what it makes you think of now. So starting with that grower champagne that you drink so much of, obviously lots of different moods for that, but
I think just like food pairing, it would just be, and I know this has answers, right? Like the folks at Krug actually, I believe, have soundtracks that go with the wine. And I just, I don't have that. I know you're trying to have fun with this.
Well, no, but what would you want to listen to? Not what is correct, but what sort of inspires you?
It would be good things, right? Like that great saying of there's only, kind of two kinds of music, like good and bad, right? So it could be anything from, what am I listening to as I'm driving? It could be The Clash to again, I've been listening to Glenn Gould play the Goldberg Variations, which is this, if you don't know it, a really super polished and stylized version of Bach pieces that are 200 years old.
I like that. Classical to The Clash. Yeah. Like I said, there's a range.
That's a pretty good mix.
How about the Soter Vineyards Pinot Noir?
Yeah, I think we might go in a classical direction there.
Okay.
Fair enough. Naming maybe a concerto, maybe like Dennis Brain, one of my favorite French horn players, playing Strauss horn concertos. How about that?
I like
avoid
that.
Their question.
I like that. And for that, love going back to your childhood memory, Chianti.
Oh, something whimsical and fun. Maybe the soundtrack to Big Night. You remember that movie?
Of course,
everything from Louis Prima to I think I'd go right there. The Big Night soundtrack. How about that?
That's perfect. James, I thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a lovely conversation. One more question. What's at the top of your list of a wine region you want to visit? Where are you off to explore when you have that opportunity?
I hope it doesn't sound cliche, but it could be Georgia, Croatia, maybe start in Alto Adige and just wander over the border a bit. And no, not exactly looking for the soul of wine, but just looking to taste things different and hopefully delicious.
Very cool. Well, people can obviously have some very delicious wines here. So if you can just remind everyone where they can find you and can they come here and what's the protocol?
Please do come and visit. So sodervineyards.com, easy, right? It's we're a click away, and that website will hopefully invite you literally and figuratively to come and visit. It's certainly easy to purchase the wines there. Yes, we'd love to be your retailer of choice. And these days with cold chain and ways to get the wine to people, it's there. We would love for quick to embrace our partners in distribution around the country, right? That's another part of relationships and collaboration that we're proud of here, those relationships that have helped us get the wines into nice restaurants.
And what about
like
visiting
that,
here?
Right? And that is absolutely, the website should invite that to happen with beautiful photographs, and you're a click away from an appointment, right? And
appointment only, or you can just...
Yeah, and I hate even saying appointment only. I almost cringe. It's like a knee-jerk reaction because it makes it sound like we're trying to keep people out or something. It's just the opposite. We're actually trying very hard to make sure that when you knock on the door that we're ready for you, and that there's not a busload of people who have come in 15 minutes earlier, taking up space and changing the atmosphere here. It just allows us to make sure that we can greet people. And, hospitality is not a small thing, right? It goes beyond just putting an open sign on the door. It's the way people feel. We want a chance to make them feel good when they're here, right? And share our vision for the beautiful things we create.
Well, I think when you pull up with your appointment and you're handed a glass of wine and you walk in and see a beautiful kitchen, not that you have to do the food pairing, but you'd be inspired to, fresh flowers and everything that are all from the property, I think it's worth coming up here to Soter Vineyards. So James, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you, Allison. This has been fun.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.